right. Well, hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, a program of Men as Peacemakers where we are shaping new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. As a reminder, these conversations help us see the dignity of those around us. It helps us practice collective care and responsibility towards one another, and to do it in a way that acknowledges that we are all human beings who are whole. So, each month, if you haven't been here before, we choose a topic that can help men and masculine folks within our communities identify what our role is in creating safer, thriving communities. We host two discussions about that month's topic, where the first conversation focuses on really learning more about this topic or the issue at hand. And then during the second conversation, we talk a little bit more about the practical ways that men and men folk can work alongside each other and others in community to create that change that we need to see. So remember, these conversations are a way for us to come together, to learn new things, usually from some different perspectives, as well as demonstrate how we can all have these important conversations with the people in our own lives, whether it's our families, partners, kids, neighbors. So we are very glad that you are joining us, whether you're watching this conversation live on Facebook or YouTube, or if you're tuning in at a later time. We appreciate that. Thank you for being here with us today.
This month, we'll be talking about a concept called mutual sexual respect, and we're so happy to welcome special guest star Sean Elmquist. Sean is the Campus Prevention Coordinator at Men As Peacemakers, or MAP, and is responsible for the development and facilitations of MAP innovative programming to prevent sexual violence on college campuses. But before we get into our conversation today, let's take a minute for each of our friends to introduce themselves. I'll start myself. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his, or él in Spanish, and I'm currently in Eagan, Minnesota.
And I'm the other Sean on this call, Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm currently in Duluth at Menace Peacemakers and just excited to have this conversation with y'all.
And I'm the other Sean at Men As Peacemakers, Sean Elmquist, he, him, his. I'm here in Duluth at MAP as well.
Thank you, Sean. And Sean, can you share briefly about you, how you got involved in this kind of work you do?
Sure. I have worked at Men As Peacemakers for 16 years. And my role here and the organization itself and the work that we do has evolved over that time quite a bit, actually. I started out basically working for a mentoring program as a volunteer coordinator, just a program that MAP used to have. And then I went from that to working on the Minnesota Men's Action Network, MinMan project, with Ed Heisler and Chuck Derry and the former executive director of MAP, Frank Jewell, who's was my first boss who I came up under. That was when I first started working on men's engagement stuff more specifically, and that has evolved into the work that I've been doing for the last decade, which is really around engaging students on college campuses, specifically focusing on party culture and shifting party culture to be safer and more equitable, and with the intent of preventing sexual violence on college campuses through reshaping party environments. But yeah, that's sort of the Cliff Notes version of my story here.
Thank you for that. I know, Sean, we all consider you one of the OGs here at Menace Peacemakers. And I forgot about that you had been a part of Min Man. which was sort of that first iteration of what the Men and Masculine Folks Network became afterwards. And so, yeah, so today conversation is going to be focusing on this thing called mutual sexual respect. And again, as this is our first conversation, we're really going to be taking a lot of time to learn from Sean and kind of have a conversation about what this means and how it shows up in the different areas of our community. So I think our first question that we have for Sean is really just, can you tell us what mutual sexual respect is, and what are some maybe some basic things that everyone should know about that?
Well, yeah, I think mutual sexual respect is a way to kind of capture a set of ideas. And I think that comes out of a desire to expand on the concept of consent. Um, and it's one of these ideas where you might think that you came up with it or something. You might be like, oh, that's a great idea. And then it emerges in 1,000 different places all at once. Because people are looking for a way to add some nuance and depth to consent. And part of that is because, consent education has sort of reached a saturation point. Now, when I work with incoming college students and I ask them to raise their hands if they've had consent education or if they're familiar with what the term consent means, they all raise their hand. That certainly wasn't the case 10 years ago. So a lot of groundwork has been done to establish a baseline knowledge of consent and just the general idea of kind of bodily autonomy and getting consent from people before you engage in any kind of physical activity. And that's mostly what it's been framed as, right? Getting enthusiastic consent or verbal consent, having people verbally agree to physical contact, and usually in a sexual context, has generally been what consent education is focused around. And as I was saying to Felix before the call, a lot of that comes out of just, consent arose sort of, not to be too pejorative about it, but rose out of a kind of a liability based way of addressing sexual assault on college campuses. That's where it really comes out of. A lot of students, especially with party culture on campus, like both the person, the complainant and the person, the perpetrator or the person who's being accused of sexual assault on a college campus, oftentimes there are situations where both people are too intoxicated to give consent. So, that brings about, the idea of consent becomes very important there because it becomes a way to kind of shift responsibility back onto the perpetrator so that they don't try to engage in sexual activity with anybody who's too wasted, which, yeah, that's fair. That sounds like something that's definitely necessary. I certainly am old enough to remember a time where that was not a consideration that people were taking. So that's really important. That's an important progressive step towards people engaging in sexual activity in these kind of environments in a healthier, safer way. It's a great idea on paper. But what I've found, and probably a lot of people who do this work, teaching consent specifically with younger people, is that a lot of times people are aware of what consent is, and that doesn't necessarily change their behavior. And as we discussed before the call started here, like, it hasn't necessarily moved the needle in terms of the amount of incidents of sexual assault that is occurring on college campuses. At least there isn't really the data there to show that yet. So that brings up the question of, in my own experience working with students, like, what is it that they care about and what needs do they have around consent? How can the concept of consent be operable for them, in their own contexts? That's where this idea of mutual sexual respect comes in. So I just talked for like 10 minutes without answering your question, but mutual sexual respect is a way to, one way to think about it. And this is how I often frame it to students, is like, okay, consent. This would be the absolute baseline for any sexual activity. We definitely need both people to be able to consent to it. So that's baseline. It's a pretty low bar, because anything that happens below that, is 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 some form of sexual assault, or at least violating people's boundaries. So that's the baseline. So mutual sexual respect is just a way to sort of think about the enormous spectrum of possibilities that exist beyond that line of consent. Okay, so we have consent. Like, there's so much, especially if we're talking about um, sex and even more complicated issues of how intimacy fits into that. What do people actually want out of engaging with sexual activity? Like, is that clear? Is that being communicated? There's so much that goes into that, right? There's people who are just getting to know each other. There's people who have been in long-term relationships, right? There's people who have had pre-existing sexual relationships that one person might think, okay, well, that means that this person's down to get together again. And that might not be how the other person is feeling at all. That's a pretty common one. There's a lot of misunderstandings that happen around that, right? Like, we hooked up a couple of times, and so I assumed that you would be down to receive this sext from me, and I'm getting the sense that you really don't like this. And actually, a lot of the cases that I've had where I worked one-on-one with students who've been accused of sexual misconduct, there's a lot of cases like that. They could be more so, there are more cases of miscommunication or crossed wires in terms of like pre-established consent, or what boundaries have been crossed. That's more often the case than people being, cases of intoxication and stuff like that. So I don't know if I'm being clear, but there's just a lot of complex nuance that some people are just naturally gifted at navigating all of that squishy, ambiguous, sort of body language, reading cues. Some people are really good at navigating that. They can just surf the cathexis of that, and they're looking very elegant, and they're very smooth, and they know when to stop and when to start, and they can just interact with people in this way that's very frictionless. That's great. Most people struggle with that in some way or another. And when there is emotional intimacy involved, and I see this more and more with younger people, things get a lot more complicated. And so mutual sexual respect is a way to frame things in terms of, okay, we have consent. That's the baseline. What do we need to progress beyond that, right? So it's not just about people not, stopping rape or stopping sexual assault. Of course we want to do that. But as we see the limitations of just framing things as consent, do you have it or not? We want to be able to give students the tools to be able to navigate some of that stuff and frame it in a way where it's like, all right, is this mutual? Is this about something that both people want? Like, are we able to agree on how we proceed? And, framing this as like a spectrum of possibilities, just like we have expanded our definition of the gender binary, like that people can exist somewhere on that binary. In fact, most people do exist somewhere on that binary. Very few people exist squarely on the polar sides of it that have been predefined. And that same kind of thinking can be applied to relationships, physical, emotional, just different forms of intimacy. So that's kind of kind of how I think of it, if that makes any sense.
It definitely makes sense. And I think a couple things that I caught you know, like I heard you say there's like a lot of assumptions that are made, or like when communication and the wires are crossed, and one person may think that other person or multiple people are all on the same page. And, you know, one of the things I remember really vividly around learning about consent is like that. The T video, and there's all sorts of different, you know, things people have made, but it's like, you know, the idea of you don't want to shove something down their throat, you know, if they're not willing or able to accept that, or communicate about it. And then, yeah, just the assumptions, I think, just in general within relationships that we tend to make about folks, whether we're like in close, intimate relationship or like even colleagues, you know, like there's so many assumptions that we're constantly making all the time. And then when we apply it to this really intimate sexual experience between humans, it's, you know, I think about, yeah, that consent can be revoked at any point, right? It's not like, yes, good, blanket statement for the end of all time, like you said, like where folks, students are, you know, having experiences and then they assume that those will continue in the same way. And so just like opening more of a dialogue around both parties involved, or, you know, multiple parties, and it being less one-sided, I guess, is kind of what I'm picking up a little bit.
I'm sorry. Do you want to say something, Sean?
Go ahead, Felix.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with both of you. I think this is the key for a healthy relationship, something that needs to be applied all the time, because people evolve, even that we have safety boundaries, people change, and we need to always have that clear connection with our partner, and be sure to utilize consent 24/7 for everything, you know. And I agree with both of you. And when we think about it, is also applied to our everyday at work, for everything. So it's super important, super healthy. And when you have safety boundaries, you can tell how that relationship every day is going to evolve, is going to be stronger, because there's a real connection with that person that you love. It's that feeling of safety, you know that you can trust that person. That person is not never gonna do anything to harm you. So yeah, this is something that, like you mentioned, Sean E. When I was growing up, the same thing. Even maybe I knew about yes and no. I always have that possibility that if I keep doing this and that, I'm gonna have access to sex if I keep practicing that, even when I heard no. So, just kiss her on the neck, do this and that. So, it wasn't really, it was really unhealthy. And now, as an adult, as a father now, more mature, I believe, I've been able to have a better understanding of that and the importance of consent. So I have another question for you, Sean. If you have something to say, go ahead and say it. But this question is going to be more related of something that you have learned during this many years, obviously doing this work, that surprised you or made you change your mind or approach. And you already mentioned some hints of that, but there's any specific things that it make you change as a man, as a man and masculine folk, in as a person and also in relationships?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot of things that, all this stuff is constantly evolving, because I have worked with like this specific cohort age group. Um, Campuses are just constantly renewing themselves with new traditional age college students. So, um, and students coming in, they're just out of high school. So, um, it's a very high risk age group, but of course, there's also a lot of opportunity because so much is changing and people are really kind of figuring out who they are and who they're going to be and how they're going to navigate these things, including relationships being a big part of what they're doing during their time on campus. So it's always evolving. I keep getting older. And in a lot of ways, I move further and further and further away from where they're at. And also, like, as a person in recovery, like, I'm further and further. A lot of the reason why I work with college students around party culture is because I used to be a musician, and I just was around a lot of party environments. And so I have a lot of experience in that world insofar as it can be a universalized experience. I've partied a lot and been in a lot of these kind of venues and environments, but I'm further and further and further away from that as I get older. So a lot of things surprise me. Um, as I have more kind of critical distance from it, there's good things and bad things about that. But the way that students relate to each other has changed a lot. There's going to be some cliches here, but certainly social media and just like the widespread adoption of that has changed the way that people relate to each other, and it's definitely changed the way that they date and have relationships and form those relationships. So that definitely changes the culture a lot. And then there's also just the way the environments have changed, and of course the isolation and alienation of the COVID years definitely has had a big effect on students, especially the ones coming in the last couple of years. And so, in my experience, I mean, I think the biggest thing is I think there's some positive things about the way the students relate to each other. For example, like Felix, you brought up this thing, like in the old school conception of like, like if you're like a sort of macho masculine guy, you're supposed to kind of be the one who pushes sexual activity forward. This was like a kind of old school conception of how that was supposed to work. And then that's shifted a lot. I think like part of that is like students just do more of kind of like a hookup culture type thing. I mean, again, this is the kind of thing where when I say this, like people are just, 19-year-old people are just like cringing left and right. Like, I get it. But there is something different about the way that they relate to each other and the way they relate to relationships and the assumptions they make about what a relationship is supposed to be. As far as like me navigating those surprises or changes, it's like I really try not to moralize. It's really hard when you're working with sex education to like I don't in terms of trying to prevent sexual violence, especially in working with students who've been accused or perpetrators. um, it's not enough to just be like everyone should just be able to have bodily autonomy and you have to um, everyone can just do whatever they want, and all you have to do is get consent, and you don't need to be confused by any of this or have any difficulty navigating with it. You just need to get with the program and adopt these progressive, sexual mores. It's just not that simple. I mean, I think there was a lot of sex education that was in that vein, and I think there are limitations to that. And so trying to navigate that without moralizing, without being like hookup culture is bad, because what you actually all want is emotional intimacy, but you're going about it the wrong way. That's just me telling on myself. Like sometimes that's how I feel when I'm hearing about their experiences, the experiences of students, of younger people. But I don't really know that, and it's not really my job to project that narrative onto their experience. So, I'm just trying to navigate, because some of it does come in the form of a surprise. Like people are like, and then, I sent them this, and I'm just like, you sent them what? Because I'm, almost 45 years old. Like there's just things where I'm like, who said who to what? And so it's, again, it's just not my job to judge that. And I'm really just trying to find kind of the golden thread. And that's kind of where the mutual sexual respect comes in. It's like, well, here's the golden thread. It's like, one thing that we can agree on, no matter what it ends up looking like. It's very common for older people to be shocked by what younger people are doing, and it's not necessarily helpful. So I just try to find the common ground. Like so much of this work is just about finding the common ground, and because I think the other thing is that there is something that comes with wisdom and experience. Not that the two go hand in hand, but hopefully in a perfect world, experience would bring about some wisdom. And one thing you can impart in younger people is like, look, I've seen this, and it doesn't always mean this, and just helping people get their emotional needs met in a way that's like healthy and not maladaptive. I think a lot of what ends up being enters what behavior ends up being in the realm of sexual misconduct on a campus is often people just not being very good at expressing their needs or getting them met, outside of like just outright, you know, sort of predator perpetration, which is just a small minority of what actually happens on campuses. So I don't know. That's kind of what comes to mind for me in terms of surprises.
I think it's interesting you bring up the sort of like morality part of it too, or like judgment, and it's exactly like what you. I was thinking it as you were saying it. Like there's wisdom that you have, right, from your experiences from doing this work, but also from your experiences of being a younger person in the scene, in the music scene, and those kinds of things, and um, it's it's interesting to me to think about how often the morality, the judgment does come into these conversations when it's like, we're not here to judge folks. We're trying to help folks be safe in what they're doing, to cause less harm, right? To prevent harm from happening to them. And I think about what you said about like, with age and wisdom, it's like you're further removed, but also when we add in that sort of judgment or like here's how you should do it or here's how it should look, I think it does, it further pushes those young folks away, and they just think they don't know what they're talking about, and so it's an interesting balance, I'm sure, that you find where you're like, how do you hold these things of being an older person coming into those spaces and trying to help teach and just create more support for these students. I think just it's so easy to throw judgments and say, well, this is what you should be doing, or you can't do that. And kids, I feel like the young people these days are really over that, and it's probably a theme, right, generations back, where the youth are trying to create something new, or they're trying to kind of find their place in the world, whether it's on a campus or, in a workplace or a relationship. And so I'm just, thinking about that and how you can sort of separate it from judgment, hold on to these connections that you're building with these younger folks. And I also think all of this applies to adults as well. I mean, I'm a single person. I know a lot of folks my age and older who maybe haven't had as much, learning and education around consent. And so then how do we continue to talk about this when it affects so many people, right, outside of college campuses as well? I'm going to pause because I'm losing my train of thought, but there you go.
Yeah, I think consent obviously need to be connected to sex ed and also connected to a healthy relationship, classes and everything. Consent is important, but if you don't have a understanding or a clear understanding what's a healthy relationship, and what's healthy in sex, that it could be seen differently in each individual, just because probably what you mentioned, Sean E, before about age, and maybe people like me, I'm in the 47, also be surprised when I hear a lot of things. But yeah, I think all those need to be connected. I think we need to educate ourselves, educate, you know, and I think it's never too early to have this conversation. I think every age have you can go deeper and deeper, but it's one of those conversations that people need to have. And also, even when you see people around you, understand also what's your responsibility when sorry, when you see a friend that is not using consent, or he's trying to take advantage of an individual. So there's also some type of responsibility on us. So yes, I totally agree. And yeah, but I believe everything needs to be connected. It's just shocking sometimes when you think about it, and you see how relationships have evolved, how everything is changing. When you think you have everything figured out, is when you realize, okay, things are different. But when you think in relationships, yeah, I think that's a must.
I wasn't sure if you were going to pop in there again, Sean, but we can move to our next question, or if you wanted to add to that too, go for it.
I would just quickly add, like, I think, again, like looking for that universal, like, not trying to project my own narratives or morality onto their experience, especially if I like really don't know what they're talking about, because I come from a completely different background. And I think people just are looking for some unalienated connection with each other. Like, I think that is kind of a universal part of it. And like the way that relates to sex, um, is for people to decide on their own. What we would hope is that the process of finding that out could be more mutualized and could happen in interconnection. I think a lot of, not just young people, but people in general, have really been steeped in this for a long time. They view the world as like a series of consumer choices, and they're so inundated with this way of looking at reality, where they're just like picking and choosing, and they want lots of choices, and they want, they define themselves and their relationship to the world around them through like making these little ranked tier choices about everything. um, and so people will be like, I want this, I'm like this, I identify with this. And to some extent that can be useful. It's good to do a self inventory and do self reflection. um, it's good to expand the vocabulary of what is available for people. I think that's good. But then you have to put it in practice, right? Because that's, where the sort of rubber meets the road, especially like, um, it's funny when you're talking about sex, like anytime you use any sort of euphemism, it's just like, sort of like, has this, yeah, you got to choose your words carefully, I guess. But yeah, it's formed through experience. So, people have a lot of expectations when they come into like a campus environment around like what they're supposed to expect. And it's weird because like, it used to be like shaped by these kind of cartoonish college movies, and people are like, this is what parties are going to be like, and this is what sex is going to be like, and this is going to be like. And you know some of that has changed, but some of it is like expectations are still very much being shaped by this kind of pop culture conception of what campus life is supposed to be like. And people are often measuring themselves against that. And I just think it breeds a lot of like, it just creates a lot of like people just not living up, not feeling like their lives are living up to these expectations, which causes them to sort of be like, I gotta step this up. And I think that's where a lot of trouble, where a lot of especially young male identified folks get into trouble, to be honest. Um, and I think some of that is pretty universal, but it's just like, yeah, I think helping people get some tools to connect with people, in mutual terms is a good thing to aim for.
Yeah, and that's almost a perfect segue. I mean, you were talking about like how we all sort of have this longing or sense of wanting to be in connection with other people, whether it's like a intimate relationship or just in general, right? We all sort of crave that connection, and that is something that we talk a lot about, or we're starting to talk a lot more about within like violence prevention spheres, this importance of increasing community connectedness, which then helps us build these safer, more thriving communities. And so our next question is, right in line with where this conversation is going, I think, is so how do you see community connectedness showing up in your work? Like, what does that look like on a college campus? Like within these party environments, like how does that connection show up, or how do you see like connection not showing up, and that may be really obvious to you as well.
Yeah, well, again, this is something that definitely was affected by COVID, like really, really majorly affected by COVID. I talk a lot about, kind of the social reproduction process of party culture. A lot of that, some of these kind of party cultures have been passed down through generations of college students for a long time. Um, and a lot of that, I think, was interrupted in a major way. I think COVID was a major disruption to those processes of reproduction. Now, that could also be a big opportunity, right? Because some of those cultural traditions and party houses and parties associated with teams or organizations or Greek life, like there's good things about that, and then sometimes there's risk associated with that, and sometimes interrupting that paradigm can be something we're aiming to do. If there's a house that just continues to be this problematic party environment, then part of what we try to do with our best party model, our campus prevention work, is to look at the environment of that building. Like, okay, who are the leaseholders? Well, they change from year to year. So what is it about this environment that is replicating these high risk conditions? Sometimes it's like very material environmental factors. Um, so, you know, uh, interrupting some of those things can be positive. But if that whole house goes away, like, and there are no more parties, like, I'm a pro party person. Like, the goal of our work, and certainly my perspective on the work, is not to like put an end to parties, and we don't focus on like alcohol cessation and stuff. It's not the focus of our thing. We try to meet students where they're at and then recognize the opportunities and risks associated with parties and try to minimize those risks. And like all I'm ever saying to students is like, at any night that you go out, you could meet like the love of your life or your best friend. Like if you sort of, are able to feel safe enough to practice vulnerability within the social contract that a party represents, it can be like amazing. It has an amazing potential for like pushing the human project forward. So if those parties just go away, um, you got a bunch of people who just aren't connecting that otherwise would be. And I think part of the, not to be too conspiratorial, but part of the larger project of our tech-based economy and the whole social media project is to alienate people from each other, which makes you more reliant on the various products that are sold. There's a profit incentive to people's alienation, and that's something that I think we really have to sort of resist. And on a campus, it seems like it should be like you folks should party with each other more. You should try to meet IRL. There's a lot of synthesis that can come out of that. And there definitely are people who are like, I have no idea how to do that. There were always people that were alienated by the mainstream campus party environment, right? I'm not trying to say that that's, the be all end all of something, but you know, helping students find ways to connect with each other continues to be a growing challenge. Yeah, that's kind of what I've been noticing. But then at the same time, like there are a lot of, there's an enormous amount of opportunities in people sort of maybe some of those more mainstream structures collapsing. It creates a vacuum where new things can grow, creative destruction, as we might frame it in some ways. So, there's always opportunities and risks. But yeah, very online students definitely struggle. And so, I'm always thinking about ways that we can adapt to meet people's needs around some of that stuff.
Yeah, I didn't even really think about that. I mean, the impact of social media alone, and then, adding in COVID and all of the isolation that created for so many of us. Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that in terms of, wow, yeah, how is this impacting community connectedness or the ability for these young folks, these college students, and younger too, right? And, Felix, you're working in middle schools and high schools, and we obviously work with adults as well. And so this question around how can we authentically create these connections online? Can we? Is that possible? And then what is that balance of, like you said, IRL in real life? Like, how do we, find some balance between those things? Because, I mean, if we're living on social media, there's this isolation, right? Which then we know isolation can lead and can create more risks for folks, for harm, for perpetrating harm, and for experiencing harm. And so that's really interesting. That is a big old experiment that, I don't know if there's data out there right now or if people are studying that, but I would find that really interesting to look at.
Absolutely. It's just there's no way I can not listen to you guys start thinking about even my own experience going through college, and even before I got to college, that idea that I had of what college was supposed to be, specifically, that party, side, because it's that jump from, okay, I'm in high school now, I need to make a decision for the rest of my life, or what I want to do for the rest of my life, and at the same time seeing these images of these parties going on, and a lot of nudity, alcohol, and at that point for me that was something that it catch my attention. I was like, yeah, I would love to do this. I would love to go to college and experience this. And through college and COVID, now when it started, my oldest one that graduated this year, she started when COVID started, and you could tell how socially uh, it was very, very awkward, very hard for her to enjoy this college experience when you're stuck in your dorm and you're not able to socialize other with the people maybe in your dorm, or people maybe in the Zoom call. So of course that affect and change everything. But it's interesting how times change, how perspective change, how now thanks to technology we have more resources, we have more opportunities to learn. and I have a question for you, Sean, regarding that, regarding resources. Are there any specific resources you like the audience to know about, or specifically if people want to learn a little bit more of what you do, or colleges that will be interested in learning a little bit more about this campus prevention, you know, uh, work that you're doing in Minnesota? But can you talk to us a little bit about those resources out there in order to learn a little bit of what you do, and how we can also be allies and learn a little bit about this?
Yeah. Um, so the Men As Peacemakers kind of campus prevention work that I do has a couple of core components. So the main kind of flagship thing is the best party model, which is, hold on a second. Since I'm at my desk. So that's like an 8-week curriculum that we take students through. It's student led, kind of like the idea is that party culture is a grassroots, um, you know, process of social reproduction that's happening alongside sanctioned campus environments. And so it's a place where students have a lot of control and a lot of ability to kind of shape their own destiny. So it's a great grassroots organizing opportunity. So we train students to facilitate what is usually like an 8-hour curriculum where we take them through, we certainly have an hour on mutual sexual respect, which is always probably our most popular hour. We have some fun activities around that. Of course, people love talking about sex, and so it's always popular. Great opportunity to talk about some of these things in a collective environment. But we also focus on environment shaping and environment and bystander intervention stuff. Just ways to give students tools to shape their environments to be safer, more equitable, and create more opportunities for more expansive environments that allow more people in. That's a big thing, right? Like we don't want those students who can't find any inroad into whatever social culture exists and stuck in their dorms. I certainly experienced that when I started college. I never really made any friends in college, and the parties I went to were weird and lame, and I felt alienated by them. So I dropped out of college and joined bands, and the music world is where I found my way in. But I was just looking for a way to connect. I think a lot of people are. And so like we want to create environments that are just more welcoming and expansive. So that's where the best party model comes in. We also have we also work with like bars and music festivals and other party environments and venues, applying some of the same ideas to shape their spaces to be safer, because obviously those spaces can be high risk environments. And so we want to shape those, help give them some of the same kind of tools conceptually to rethink their environments and hopefully reduce some risk there. We also do some tertiary prevention work with our alternative response program, which is basically working with campuses through the Title IX process to work one-on-one with students who've been accused of sexual misconduct. So sort of a restorative justice model. It's not circle based, but that's a new thing that we've been working on for the last couple of years, and that's something I'm really excited about. And I've learned a lot doing that process. So those are kind of the main things that we can offer for campuses. I should say, we also do like first year orientation stuff, and obviously like larger presentations. And we have a whole series of things that we do with first year orientation, incorporating some of the elements from the best party model for sure, and definitely with a focus on the mutual sexual respect for sure. And often we frame that campuses will bring us in even as a way to that might be the way that they're covering the consent education piece of their orientation. So we're just sort of starting them off with a more expansive view of what consent can mean, which I think can be really good. And the way that people can find out about that is through our website. We are in the process of redoing the website, so that I think will be easier to use. One thing that you'll be able to find on the website, and we'll be sharing out on the Men As Peacemakers social media in the coming months, is a campus diagnostic tool, which sounds pretty technical, but basically it's a way for campuses to kind of share what resources they're working with, what obstacles they might have, and just like give us a sense of where they're at so that we can tailor offerings to their campus. Everything that we do at MAP, we try to have be of of the community, meeting communities where they're at, and helping them to address their own problems, because of course they're going to be the ones who have the best lay of the land, and know what the best you know um, what I call inflection points are, and so that campus diagnostic tool helps them identify some of those, and then we can kind of come in and maybe tell them more about what we could maybe do for them.
That's all a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. And you recently revamped the best party model curriculum, right? I remember looking at that when that was kind of brand new, and it's pretty fun, and I love like how it's set up, where it's like, there's some talking and whatever, but a lot of it is like just them engaging as peers and doing these activities together, and I think you're right. Like we said this before, there just aren't a whole lot of areas and places where we can have conversations, around sex or intimacy or party culture. I mean, a lot of that I think is kind of, behind the scenes, because folks are worried about, alcohol or drugs or, whatever. Like the people who say we need to get rid of parties rather than how can we actually shape these to be safe for folks. Because I think you're absolutely right. College is this time where you show up and you don't really know who you are, and it's shaped so much by those people, the connections that we make and students make. And so it is. I really like that curriculum. It's really fun. So I definitely recommend folks reach out and take a look at that. And yeah, it sounds like from what you're saying too, Sean, like other folks, like if they are in positions where there may be a bar owner or, some concert, planner, like it sounds like anyone could really reach out and just say, hey, I heard this, what could we do for our group or our, band or whatever. Is that right too?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Awesome. All right. I just got our 10-minute warning. So, yeah, as we are wrapping up today's conversation, the question that we're starting to ask folks at the end of these, I'll pop it up here. But, Sean, we actually had sort of a similar conversation this morning at our staff meeting. But what do you particularly feel hopeful for the future and for these future generations, these, current college students and the ones coming up and younger youth, adults? What are those hopes that you have?
Well, I have an enormous amount of hope, and there's a lot of really positive things I see with people at that traditional college age. Now, people are generally a lot more empathetic, a lot more gentle, and a lot less like following the scripts that maybe people like Felix and I, and probably you as well, Sean. You're not that much younger. um, grew up with some of those really harmful, repressive, sometimes backed up by violence, like whether it's like bullying or just like general sort of like male socialization that um, just caused all of us a lot of psychological damage, whether we were victims of it or were perpetrated it ourselves. I definitely did both. I see less of that, and that's really good. People are more gentle, and they're definitely more have a bigger vocabulary to describe their experience. There's a more pluralistic, more expansive view of what is possible for people and their interior lives and how they represent that to the world and how they express themselves and who they are. It's not perfect, but I think a lot of progress has been made for sure. And that's really good. So, especially when I'm working with like really traditionally kind of mainstream, masculine social groups like fraternities or really male dominated sports programs, like football and fraternities, things like that. Like even the attitudes within those just the vibe of some of those cultures has shifted, and I think is easing up, and I think only good things can come out of that. So that's really positive. And then just in general, I think people are more open to different possibilities, and a lot of the work and just evolution that's happened around gender identity. I think, sometimes people, I mean, traditional college age has always been a time for people to explore their sexuality and possibly their gender if they felt like they were in a progressive enough environment to be able to do that. For a lot of people, their time on campus is the most sort of forgiving and expansive environment they might ever be in their whole lives. And so, there's always been some exploration that was available to people, but I think there is now just an assumption. There's more of an assumption I'm seeing, just a shift. And even on conservative religious based campuses, there's just a lot more expansion around the language, both institutionally, but also from individual students. And I think, there's a lot of good that can come out of that. There is this ever ending, this kind of unceasing tension between like monogamy and what possibilities might exist outside of that. And in some ways, I think, that would be probably the bleeding edge of where a lot of the social change is happening, as far as from what I can see. I think you're seeing a lot of tension where people might be like, okay, this person identifies here on the gender spectrum. A lot of people are like, okay, yeah, I know about that. I grew up around that. And that's not, I'm down with that. I accept that as an imminent thing. But then they're like, I want a girlfriend. Well, how do I do that? I don't know. There's like still people who just have these like, pretty traditional things that they pretty firmly want, and they don't necessarily know how to make that happen. So, some things are changing, some things may never change. We'll see.
That's funny you say that. I'm 47 now. If I'm single again, I don't even know how to start a relationship. You know, even well, we know, but it's understanding right now. Time have changed, and yeah, it's the more you're aware about what's a healthy relationship, the more you realize that maybe there's some things that you need to change in yourself to be that person that is supportive and is the best version of yourself. But something that I'm not hopeful, but I'm grateful that is all the knowledge you've been able to share with us, Sean, today. I think being able to bring this information to campuses, to just bringing this conversation in general, is it takes us closer to that world that we dream about, of being free of of violence, where everybody is the best version of themselves. And I know with this tool we're getting to that. We're uh, bringing hope, and we're bringing esperanza. That's what we call hope, in Spanish. And that expectation and and knowledge and knowing that it's possible thanks to things like that. And the importance of us as community working together, encouraging each other to be the best we can be, and yeah, and not being scared of make our voices, be scared of our voices. Just we have this power, and sometimes us being silent make us part of this problem. So thank you so much, Sean, for joining us at the kitchen table conversation, and again, to offering all your wisdom and preaching here with us. And
Yeah.
thank you again to all of you who joined us at our conversation today. As a reminder, we're holding these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Time. Please join us. for our next live conversation on Thursday, February 22nd at 12 p.m. also Central Time, where we'll talk about the practical ways men and masculine folks can work alongside others in the community to create change when it comes to mutual sexual respect. So thank you, Sean.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Always love listening to you share about this stuff, Sean. So thank you. And for everybody else, don't forget, you can follow us on all the social medias to stay connected with the Men and Masculine Folks Network and to find these kitchen table conversations. You can find us on Facebook. We're on YouTube. You can also now listen to some of our previous conversations in podcast form. So you can look on those or look for those on Spotify or Podbean. And if you happen to be watching this conversation as a part of your virtual training for the Don't Buy It project, you can check out the description below for instructions on how you can download the corresponding discussion and activity guides. And as always, we encourage y'all to have a conversation like this. Have one with the people in your lives about mutual sexual respect and what that looks like and feels like for you and how you can start practicing those things. Join us next time as we talk a little bit more about, what does this look like in practice? How do we do this? Felix, to your point of how the heck would you get into a relationship now? So looking forward to that conversation as well in 2 weeks. And again, just a reminder, together we are building this interconnected community that will be, I believe, free from violence, where everyone can thrive. We're doing that together, and I am just grateful to be a part of this movement with you two brothers of mine, and onward we go. So thanks again for joining us here at the kitchen table, and we'll see you next time.